Okay, so let's just dive right in. We are, what's that? In Celebrate Recovery, right, we have 8 recovery principles in the 12 steps that we just read. And so in the course of the 16 lessons and 25 lessons, we're at lesson 16. So we're at principle 6 in step 8. If you weren't here for the first ones, it's okay. There'll be stuff that you can glean from this lesson that will be a blessing to you. So principle 6 says this. It says, evaluate all my relationships. Offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me and make amends for harm I've done to others, except when to do so would injure them or others. And the biblical comparison for that is found in Matthew 5:7, happy are the merciful, and Matthew 5:9, happy are the peacemakers. And then step 8 says, we made a list, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing. We're going to focus on that word willing a little bit because I don't want anyone freaking out that they have to go home tonight and call everyone they ever needed to make amends to. That's not what we're going to do. Don't worry. Became willing to make amends to them all. And then Luke 6:31, the biblical comparison for that is, do to others as you would have them do to you. So we'll be on principle 6 for a few lessons. Tonight we're just going to kind of do the broad brush strokes, a broad overview. Principle 6 is one of the most important principles probably because up till now, principle 1 through 5 and steps 1 through 7, we've been doing a bunch of personal recovery. We've been working on ourselves, right? We admitted we were powerless. We turned our lives and our wills over to the care of God. We did a moral inventory. We shared our wrongs with someone we trust. We admitted our shortcomings. We asked God to remove them. And now we're going to take care of our horizontal relationships, right? Now that God's been doing a mighty work in us, we're going to see how we can extend that out into all of our relationships in 2 basic ways, making amends and offering forgiveness. Tonight, we're going to primarily focus on amends, and then in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the 3 kinds of forgiveness. Okay? Making amends is the I got ahead of myself. Okay, so if I were to sum up principle 6 in one sentence, it would be this, right? Forgive me as I learn how to forgive. Forgive me as I learn how to forgive. And I'll say this now, and then I'll say it a bunch more times. Forgiveness does not equal trust. We're not suggesting that you forgive people who have hurt you and let them back into close proximity so they can hurt you more. We're not saying that, right? Forgiveness is the first part. If reconciliation should happen, that's something that's later, and we'll talk about that later. But for right now, we're just talking about forgiveness and making amends as a way to grow closer to God and grow closer to other people. Okay, so making amends is the beginning of the end of isolation or separation from God and from other people. Have you ever noticed that when you hold on to resentments or you hold on to anger, you tend to isolate and stay away from people? Have you noticed that? And it pretty much works the same with God. So this is the way we end that isolation and we begin to have healing in our lives. I think the fan is in my mic. Can you told me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you tell me that. Maybe you could turn it down, or
I wanted you to be cool.
I am feeling temperature-wise good. No, it's good. I can't actually. The pastor would have to do it, and he says he's comfortable, so we'll be okay. It's going to be fine. Okay, so whenever we talk about making amends, everybody gets nervous, especially the first time around, right? We're talking about putting our past behind us so we can move forward into the new life that Jesus promised us. But whenever we talk about making amends, usually there's 3 things that people kind of balk at. They're like, and this is one of them. If God's forgiven me, isn't that enough? Why is there anything else to do, right? I'm forgiven. I should be good. Why is it necessary to drag up the past? Well, we're not trying to drag it with us. We're actually trying to cut it loose and leave it behind. And one of the ways of doing pieces of that is by learning how to make amends and offer forgiveness. And then making amends is not about our past. That's not what it's about. It's actually about our future. It's about being able to relate to God and to other people in a new way. So hopefully, right, you made notes about that, because when you start to get nervous later, as we dig more into this, you could just remind yourself, it's going to be okay, right? There's a plan here, and we're just going to take small bits at a time. Before we can have the healthy relationships that we want to have, right, we have to clean out all the guilt, all the shame, all the pain that we've had done to us and that we've done to other people. We have to clear that out and leave it in the past. And principle 6 is where we start to do that. So in the words of step 8, we're going to make a list of all the persons that we've harmed, and we're just going to become willing to make amends. We're not going to start making amends yet. We're just going to make the list, and we're going to pray for willingness. And that's the only thing, right, that I'm asking that you do, is that you ask God to help you be willing, and just make a list. That's it, right? Anything more than that could be overwhelming. So, for example, I'll just share a couple things from my own story. So when I did a step study where we dig deep the first time, and I made my list, it was long, right? I was 50 before I got into serious recovery, and so I'd lived a pretty rebellious life, and I'd hurt lots of people. So the list I made was long, and there were things on that list that I did not even want to consider having to navigate. Like, for example, when I was 21, I had a girlfriend who got pregnant, and I convinced her to have an abortion. I convinced her to have an abortion, and then 3 weeks later I left. And I hadn't talked to her in 25 years or something. And I had been carrying the weight of what I had done to her and what I'd done to our baby all that time. And the idea of talking to her and saying that I was sorry for what I'd done to her and for the way I'd treated her was overwhelming, and I could hardly bear it. But I was desperate to have something new in my experience, so I wrote her name on the list. I had no idea how I'd have the conversation. I had no idea how the conversation would go, but I was willing to consider that God would do something new, and I just put her name on the list, right? So however challenging some of these experiences are that you've had in your life, I just really want to encourage you that right now we're just making the list, and God will take care of the next things next, right? Everything has to do with timing, and we're going to talk about that a little more. So so we already talked about willingness. So in Matthew 5:23 and 24, we just did this verse a minute ago. It says, "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift." Isn't it interesting that so in the context of this verse, the gift is not a sacrifice. The gift is a gift of thanks, right? It's talking about if you're bringing a gift of thanks to God, God is saying, well, what's more important to me is that you go reconcile your relationships. Rather than giving something to me, go work things out with whoever you know has something against you. And it isn't interesting. It doesn't say anyone that you know you hurt. It just says anyone that's holding something against you, right? So right now, though, we're not asking you to run off and do that. We're just saying make a list. If you know that someone has something against you, put them on your list. You'll notice on the back of your sheet, if you just want to flip it over real quick, it says amends list, and we're going to get to that here in just a second. But I just wanted you to know it was back there, so right, we could look forward to that together. Okay, so let's look at the second part of Principle 6. It says, make amends for harm I've done to others, except when to do so would harm them or others. So the first part is about being willing to consider forgiveness, and the second part is a call to action, right? So first we're going to consider being made willing, and then after that, God's going to call us to action to make amends and offer forgiveness. So if you still have your sheet flipped over, that would be good. I want you to draw a line down the middle of the amends list. I want you to draw a line down the middle. Now later when you get into a step study in book 3, there actually is a fancy form for that, but we're just going to use what we have tonight. So on the left-hand side, I want you to consider who would be the first person that you would put on your amends list? Who is the person that God has put on your heart that you've probably hurt the most in your life? That at some point in the future, right, when we get to that step, that you would need to make amends to. I want you to write at least one name there. Just write one name. Two, if you can think of two, on the left-hand side of that list. And then on the right-hand side of that list, I want you to think about who is the person that has hurt you the most, that you need God to work on your heart to be able to forgive that person. At least one person. Two, if they come to your mind easy. Who is the person that's going to be the hardest for you to forgive? And just write them there. So as we continue to work on Principle 6 over the next couple of months, we'll be adding to this list, but we just want to start somewhere tonight. If you have the courage to write a name down tonight, then that means that you're going to have the courage to do the next thing that God is going to call you to do. All right, so let's dive right into our acrostic. Your first fill-in on the amends acrostic is the A, and the A in amends stands for admit the hurt and the harm. The path out of denial is the path of honesty, where we admit that we have been hurt and we have caused harm. So in Principle 4, right, we did some work on that. And most of us, right, got to recovery having all of our feelings bottled up. Most of us weren't taught how to talk about our feelings, how to express our feelings, how to process our feelings. And recovery is a safe place to be able to do that. So what we're going to do here in Principle 6 is we're going to finish processing our past, whatever hurts, resentments, wrongs, whatever we've been holding on to that we haven't let go of. We're going to work on those things now, because holding on to resentments blocks our recovery, and it blocks our ability to receive God's forgiveness. God's forgiveness is always available. It's a free gift. He's always trying to offer it to us, but sometimes we resist, right? Now, why would we do that? Why would we do that? Well, in Luke 6:37, it says, do not judge others, and God will not judge you. Do not condemn others, and God will not condemn you. Forgive others, and God will forgive you. This has to do with our heart, not God's heart. God wants to forgive us. He wants us to forgive other people because he knows that's what's best for us. And then the M in amends stands for make a list. Make a list. I've already talked to you a bunch about making the list. When you're in a step study and you go through Principle 4 and Step 4, you're going to do your inventory, you're going to have a chart, and you'll be able to glean from that chart more information to fill in this list. So we're not going to go into that much more tonight. I do want to say, though, don't worry about the how-tos. Like, don't worry about, well, how am I going to make amends to that person, right? Like with the lady I mentioned. Don't worry about how you're going to do it. Just put them on the list. Don't ask questions like, how could I ever ask so-and-so for forgiveness? Or how could I ever offer forgiveness to that person that did that to me? Right? I know that lots of you, like me, had childhood trauma. You had things done to you as a child that shouldn't have been done to you. And navigating that hurt and that pain is super hard. It's really hard, right? Like as a man, I remember the first time I got up in front of a church and I admitted, right, that sexual things had happened to me when I was 6. Well, that wasn't easy. I didn't want to talk about that. I want to talk about that in private, much less in front of the whole church. But the things that we keep in secret are the things that hurt us. Right? Things that are exposed to the light of God, we can have freedom from. So just be willing to put people on the list. I didn't think there was any way I was ever going to be able to forgive that guy, right? But God worked it out. God made a way forward that I was able to forgive that guy and be freed of all that hurt and all that resentment. I don't let that guy back in my life, of course, right? Because I don't trust him, but I'm free from the pain and the anger and the resentment of the trauma that happened. How could I ever apologize to you could fill in the blank. How could I ever forgive? You could fill in the blank. How be willing to be made willing. That's the key for this principle, is be willing to be made willing. It has been said that encouragement is oxygen for the soul. Encouragement is oxygen for the soul, and that's your next fill-in in Amends. Encourage one another, right? This room is full of people who will encourage you. If you need some encouragement, just talk to anyone who's near you, right, on the break or after small group. Everyone in this room, right, who's been coming for a while wants to encourage you because God has encouraged them in their time in recovery. It's super important, right? By this time, you should have a sponsor or an accountability partner, definitely an encourager who can give you an objective opinion to ensure that what you're doing with your amends list and your forgiveness list, you're doing for the right reasons. You're doing for the right reasons. In Hebrews 10:24, it says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds." If we spend as much time considering that as we do worrying about things or saying negative things, our communities would be way different. And just remember that you could only encourage someone else as directly proportionate to how much you encourage yourself. So if you're doing a whole bunch of negative self-talk, you're not going to be able to encourage someone else. So it's important that you encourage yourself first. Believe the promises that God says about you. Okay, the N in amends is the reason for making amends, which is it's not for them. It's not for them. So we do need to approach people that we're offering forgiveness or amends to humbly, honestly, sincerely, and willingly. We want to be certain that we don't offer excuses, we don't try to justify, we don't try to minimize what happened. We just want to focus on our part, right? That's the beautiful thing about recovery, is we get to focus on our part in any situation and in any relationship. So it's not for them. When I had like 2 years or something, 2.5 years sober, I decided that it was time to make amends to my daughter. And I hadn't talked to my daughter in years because I had chosen drugs and a drug lifestyle over a relationship with her. So I reached out to her and I sent her a letter on Facebook Messenger and apologized for emotionally and physically abandoning her and asked for her forgiveness. And she wasn't ready to forgive me, right? She was still too hurt, and I wasn't a safe person to her. She articulated, "I'm not going to let you back in my life to just leave me again. I've done that enough times with you. I'm not willing to do it again." And so at first, right, that was super painful. That's not what I wanted to hear. What I wanted to hear was, "Daddy, I love you. I'm so glad that you're back." That's not what she said, though. She said, "Don't ever contact me again." So I wrote her one more letter, and she repeated, "Don't ever contact me again." So that was, 6 years ago, and it's been challenging, but I've been freed from the emotional and psychological baggage that I was carrying because I articulated to her that I was sorry for what I'd done. She chose not to receive that, and that's sad, but I did my part, and I received a certain level of healing as a result of that. So it's not for them, right? It's for you. But don't expect anything back. If you're making amends for a reward or something, that's not going to work out. What you will get, though, is freedom from your hurts, hang-ups, and habits. Principle 6 says that I'm responsible to make amends for harm I've done to others. Jesus said it this way: love your enemies and do good to them. Lend and expect nothing back. God loves us generously and graciously, and he wants us in turn to treat other people that way. God is kind, so we need to be kind. Did you know, and I'm pretty sure most of you do know this, but did you know that you can become addicted to bitterness and to hatred and to anger and to revenge the same way you could be addicted to alcohol or drugs or relationship? So a life that's characterized by bitterness, resentment, and anger will kill you emotionally, and it will shrivel your soul. It will do that. It will produce the 3 Ds, right? Holding on to bitterness and resentment will produce the 3 Ds: depression, despair, and discouragement. For sure, with every person. An unforgiving heart will cause you more pain and destruction than it will ever cause the person who hurt you. I had a situation with my sponsor one time where he said something that made me mad. And so I thought, well, I just won't talk to him. And right, I'll show him. I just won't talk to him. And I don't know, maybe 2 months went by and he called me and he said, why don't you come over and, we'll hang out? No, I don't want to do that. Why not? I'm mad at you. And he was like, you're mad at me? Yeah, I'm mad at you. I didn't know that. He said, well, maybe you should come and talk to me about it. So as I'm driving over there, I got more mad. I was like, he doesn't even care that I'm mad. Well, he didn't even know, right? He didn't even know. He wasn't carrying the weight of that. I was. And that is really how it actually works. An unforgiving heart will cause you more pain and destruction than it will ever cause the person that hurt you. All right, the D in amends stands for do it at the right time. Do it at the right time. So this principle not only requires courage and good judgment and willingness, but it calls for a careful sense of timing, right? When you start making the list, you're going to feel highly motivated to start calling those people. Don't do that yet, right? Wait. Just make the list, and you'll get direction if you're in a step study from your step study leaders or from your sponsor. There's a time to let things happen, and there's a time to make things happen. In Ecclesiastes 3:1, it says it this way: to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. So before making amends, we got to pray, we got to ask Jesus for his guidance, his direction, and his perfect timing. And then principle 6 goes on to say, except when to do so would harm them or others. There's a whole bunch of examples I could give you about that, but I'll just say this. Once you have your list ready, it's important that you review that list with someone else who's already done this, because they'll be able to help you see if it's appropriate to make all of those amends, right? So, for example, I had somebody ask me one time, well, I did this thing to my friend like 15 years ago. I had an affair with his wife, and he doesn't know, and I need to tell him. And so I just asked a few questions. I was like, so how long ago? 15 or 20 years ago. And I was like, okay, and are they still married? Yeah, they were separated at the time, but they worked it all out, and they're together now. And I said, so what purpose will be served by you bringing up something that happened 20 years ago, right? That will do more harm than good. So it's important that we have someone who can speak into our situation and can help us see the timing and the value of making amends. And then, I already said that. And then in Philippians 2:3-4, it says, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. It sounds amazing, right? But it is hard. So we don't want to wait until we feel like it's time to make amends or it's time to offer forgiveness. We want to do it in God's time when God says that we should. And then the last letter in amends stands for start living the promises of recovery, reconciliation, and redemption. Start living the promises of recovery. So as we complete this principle, we'll discover God's gift of true freedom from our past. We can actually leave the past in the past, I can attest to that, and move forward. We'll begin to find peace and serenity, which is two of the big reasons we keep coming, right, to celebrate recovery. We want peace and serenity. and we'll become ready to embrace God's new purpose for our lives. In Romans 12:18 it says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And in Joel 2:25, God promised this, I will repay you for the years that the locusts have eaten. If the worship team wants to come back up. So the thing that Principle 6 is offering you is freedom. Freedom. Freedom from the chains of resentment. Freedom from anger. Freedom from hurt. Freedom from all the relational problems that you had in the past. Freedom to move into new, healthy relationships.